In this episode, the lunar surface claims yet another casualty. SpaceX unveils an ambitious new strategy for Starship, while Boeing's Starliner encounters further complications. This past week, a compact lunar landing craft from Japan joined the ever-expanding catalog of unsuccessful attempts to touch down on the moon's surface, a formerly desolate and empty world that is rapidly transforming into a graveyard for spacecraft. The doomed landing vehicle, named Resilience, was manufactured by ispace, a Japanese startup company, and belongs to their Hakuto R series, a program that has previously attempted a lunar landing and likewise ended in catastrophe. Resilience had been journeying from Earth toward the moon for approximately 5 months before it was finally prepared to execute its final descent. The craft had actually been launched aboard the same Falcon 9 rocket as a second lander, Firefly's Blue Ghost, departing Earth on January 15th. Blue Ghost selected a more straightforward trajectory to the moon and eventually became the most triumphant American lunar landing vehicle in many decades. While Blue Ghost was creating history, Resilience was following a more circuitous path to the moon, one designed to preserve energy and enhance safety. The theory was solid, but as space aficionados connected to observe the landing, what unfolded was far from satisfactory. Slightly more than 60 seconds before the anticipated touchdown, telemetry vanished from the display screen, leaving only a computer-generated animation of the lander for viewers to watch. The animation played for several additional seconds before it too ceased and the camera switched to a live feed of the flight director. He sat there with his palms covering his face, and it was evident something had gone catastrophically awry. The remaining team members also grew extremely solemn, and observers could practice. Ally witnessed the optimism evaporating from their bodies. Several personnel remained at their stations examining data, while others moved about the room with visible anxiety. Only after the broadcast concluded was any formal announcement made regarding the lander's destiny, which arrived as no revelation. Resilience had been destroyed during the landing sequence and had crashed into the moon. While engineering teams are continuing to examine data to identify a conclusive reason for the vehicle's malfunction, it is apparent that something malfunctioned with the laser rangefinders installed on the craft. The rangefinders, which calculate the distance from the craft to the surface using laser technology, are essentially the same LiDAR technology found in numerous autonomous vehicles and robotic systems. This sensor encountered a malfunction where the rangefinders failed to deliver their readings in time, which postponed critical data from reaching the flight computer. When the rangefinders finally generated those readings, it was already too late and Resilience lacked adequate time to decelerate, and it collided with the moon at tremendous speeds, likely somewhere around 50 meters per second. ispace characterized this incident as, in their words, a landing. This setback would be devastating for any small enterprise attempting to reach the moon. Nevertheless, it was particularly painful for ispace, as this represented their second endeavor at the Silver Sphere. Their initial mission concluded when the lander exhausted its fuel while still elevated above the surface and executed another, as they termed it, hard landing. This outcome is genuinely unfortunate because the Hakuto R lander is actually an exceptionally capable machine on paper. The lander features 8 sides and nearly resembles a rounded cube equipped with solar panels. Hakuto R possesses 7 engines underneath it, 6 of which are utilized for maneuvering and another for descent operations. This configuration is supported by 4 wide landing legs. This flight, along with the preceding one, were both intended to demonstrate Hakuto R as a dependable landing system. Now, the destiny of the company and their engineering design remains uncertain. We cannot help but recall the Intuitive Machines IM-2 mission from earlier this year, also representing the second landing endeavor for a small company with aspirations of reaching the moon, which also suffered a hard landing that was predominantly attributed to a laser altimeter, which is noteworthy. By comparison, Firefly's Blue Ghost did not depend on a LiDAR system, and instead employed a camera vision-based artificial intelligence algorithm for its primary navigation. Obviously, Firefly will need to duplicate their landing achievement to conclusively prove that it was more than merely good fortune, but simultaneously, consistent failure would seem to indicate more than simply bad luck. There is something flawed with the methodology that most contemporary technology companies are adopting when it comes to landing on the moon. On a related note, Elon Musk's SpaceX harbors aspirations to land their Starship rocket as distant as the planet Mars. And we have recently obtained a fascinating glimpse at the company's new strategy to achieve that objective. Ultimately, the triumph of Starship is going to depend on an extraordinarily high volume of launches, which is going to necessitate a substantial amount of infrastructure to be constructed here on Earth. They require additional launch pads, which consequently also have to accommodate Starship landings as well. and the initial step in achieving this will be to broaden Starship operations from Texas to Florida. Naturally, SpaceX is still very much in the process of determining how to fly their Starship successfully, but it appears they are not willing to delay building an empire to support that rocket if and when it does become operational. The FAA has recently disclosed that SpaceX intends to construct not one but 2 additional Starship launch pads. However, these new pads will not be constructed at Starbase. For this development, we must move halfway across the nation to Florida, where the Cape Canaveral Space Force Station is situated. This is where SpaceX seeks to convert an existing launch complex to a pad capable of accommodating up to 76 launches annually, with a landing of both Starship and Super Heavy for each launch, totaling 152 landings per year. The project encompasses constructing launch and landing pads, propellant storage facilities, and other infrastructure, along with widening the Phillips Parkway to transport the rocket to the launch site. This information is all derived from an FAA draft environmental impact statement for SLC-37. That facility is located down south on the Cape from the primary SpaceX launch site for Falcon 9 and Falcon Heavy, which is Pad 39. Pad 37 was constructed in the early 1960s, and it was utilized to launch the Saturn I rocket as part of the early phase of Apollo hardware testing. Most recently, the pad served as home to Boeing's Delta IV rocket from 2002 until its retirement in 2024. The FAA document details everything that SpaceX will modify at the site and provides a response on how each element will impact the environment. This encompasses the effect on nearby populations and how the sound or shock waves might disrupt civilian lives. Detailed in the statement are 4 new structures that will be constructed. 2 600-foot launch towers, which will be 120 feet taller than the current towers SpaceX has built for Starship. This is likely so that the pads can accommodate the planned Starship Block 3, which will be significantly taller than Block 1 and Block 2. These 2 massive towers will differ from SpaceX's current Mechazilla, as they will not catch every vehicle that returns to land. This is where the other 2 structures will come into play. 2 225-foot round pads will be constructed with their own sets of chopsticks for additional catch capabilities. These will likely be shorter and designed specifically for the Starship upper stages, which will require a longer refurbishment process and will not be immediately returned to the launch mount like the Super Heavy booster. There will be a third option for landing rockets at this new construction as well. However, it is less at the pad and more off the coast adjacent to the pad. Super Heavy will also have the capability of landing offshore on remote drone ships, or it can be expended into the water for maximum flexibility. SpaceX will obviously construct most of this infrastructure locally in Florida to avoid transportation costs. However, the same cannot be said about the rockets they will actually be launching. The statement details how SpaceX will transport Starship and Super Heavy boosters from Starbase, Texas to Florida before production facilities are operational at the Cape. The rockets will be positioned horizontally and placed on barges for transportation through the waterways between the 2 states. This will likely require development of new systems to erect the boosters and ships, as Our ship has never been positioned horizontally and is built in a vertical orientation. We had previously believed that Starship could not be laid down on its side for structural reasons, but we also know that SpaceX has invested considerable time reinforcing the body of the rocket to make it more rigid with each iteration. Regardless, this will be a challenging operation. However, since the entire Starship system is designed to be reusable, once they have accumulated a backlog of ships and several boosters at the coast, they can cease transporting them and instead concentrate on building them locally. The significant question is, why does SpaceX not simply use the launch complex they already are leasing at the Cape? Not only that, but the site where they launch Falcon 9 already has a Starship launch pad constructed. Will that be abandoned for these new towers? Well, for an explanation, you have to take into consideration the constant Falcon 9 launches occurring at LC-39A, the location of SpaceX's Florida Starship launch pad. SpaceX will eventually phase out Falcon 9 and Falcon Heavy for Starship, but it will not happen in the immediate future. And as of now, Falcon remains the most frequently launched rocket in the world. SpaceX will continue to use the pad at 39A. They simply do not want to create interference by attempting to scale it up to 76 additional launches per year on top of 100 or more Falcon liftoffs. The alternative option they had was to develop an entirely new launch site at Cape Canaveral known as SLC-50. But this was less attractive as SLC-37 is currently leased by ULA, but has not been used since the recent retirement of Delta IV Heavy, which means it is already equipped with expensive hardware that could be transferred over to Starship. The FAA environmental statement is merely a draft currently and first must go to public comment and then receive approval, but it appears that SpaceX is closer than ever to relocating Starship to the Cape. As SpaceX continues to expand, one of its largest competitors seems to be experiencing difficulty getting off the ground after it faced issues over the past year. This week, we received some long-anticipated news regarding the Boeing Starliner spacecraft, but that news left the future of the spacecraft even more ambiguous, with the next flight no longer scheduled for this year. NASA issued a statement addressing this, saying, to quote, NASA is assessing the earliest potential for a Starliner flight to the International Space Station in early 2026, pending system certification and resolution of Starliner's technical issues. This leads us to conclude that the leaks that were detected a year ago during Starliner's flight were not the only problems with the spacecraft. There were potentially other complications that needed addressing, which caused the postponement. It remains unclear whether the next flight will include people on board. NASA stated again, to quote, the agency is still evaluating whether Starliner's next flight will be in a crew or cargo configuration. Regardless, it is expected to no longer be considered a test flight. It could potentially be rebranded as a new type of cargo-only Starliner flight. Or if it is certified for the crew, then it could possibly become Starliner's Crew 1. The astronauts that will fly on Crew 1 have not all been assigned yet, which means that it is less likely to be a crewed mission. This will be heavily determined by the outcome of upcoming engine tests, which will certify the vehicle. The thrusters on Butch and Suni's flight last summer had significant problems with 5 of its engines cutting out and 1 never reactivating. That is why engine reliability is something they desperately need to demonstrate. On top of this, they also must prove that the spacecraft will no longer leak and strand astronauts at the space station.